US President Donald Trump issued a stark warning to Russian President Vladimir Putin, threatening severe consequences if Moscow obstructs peace in Ukraine. Trump did not specify what the consequences could be, but hinted that punitive measures, possibly economic sanctions, could follow if their scheduled meeting in Alaska on Friday fails to produce results. However, Trump stressed that the talks would serve as a stepping stone for a possible second meeting, this time involving Ukrainian President Zelensky. Trump did not provide a time frame for a second meeting.
Consequences if Vladimir Putin does not agree to stop the war after your meeting on Friday?
Yes, they will. Yeah.
What will the consequences
there will be
be?
consequences.
Sanctions, tariffs?
There will be, I don't have to say, there will be very severe consequences.
However, Russia is likely to resist Ukraine and Europe's demands strongly, and previously has said its stance had not changed since it was first detailed by Putin in June 2024. Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Alexei Fadiv earlier said that Moscow's stance had not changed since last year. French President Emmanuel Macron said Trump agreed that Ukraine must be involved in any discussions about the ceding of land, while German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who hosted the virtual meeting, said the principle that borders could not be changed by force must continue to apply. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Wednesday that he warned US President Donald Trump that Vladimir Putin was bluffing about wanting to end the conflict. At a joint briefing in Berlin with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Zelensky expressed hope that the Trump-Putin meeting on Friday will focus on a ceasefire. Zelensky added that he wanted a three-leader meeting, saying no talks about Ukraine should exclude Kyiv. On Wednesday, European leaders urged US President Donald Trump in a virtual meeting to work towards peace in Ukraine that safeguarded European and Ukrainian security interests. Germany's capital Berlin hosted the virtual meeting. It took place 2 days before Trump-Putin summit. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, among others, attended the meeting. French President Emmanuel Macron said that Trump had said that any territorial issues can only be negotiated with Ukraine. But ahead of the talks, Russia's foreign ministry called the European consultations with Ukraine as insignificant.
Just days ahead of the Trump-Putin summit in Alaska, European partners were engaged in hectic parleys in Berlin over the fate of Ukraine. They virtually spoke to Trump with an aim to be on the same page.
We have made several points clear for the negotiations. We have made it clear that Ukraine must be at the table when the follow-up meetings take place. We want the negotiations to proceed in the right order. A ceasefire must come first. Essential elements should then be agreed in a framework agreement.
According to French President Emmanuel Macron, Trump said that any territorial issues can only be negotiated with Ukraine.
The second point, on which things were very clear and expressed as such by President Trump, is that territorial questions concerning Ukraine can be and will be negotiated only by the Ukrainian president. This is the position that we support. It was very clearly expressed by President Trump.
However, Russia's foreign ministry has already downplayed Europe's outreach to Ukraine, describing it as insignificant.
We regard the consultations requested by Europeans as a politically and practically insignificant actions. Europeans verbally support the diplomatic efforts of Washington and Moscow to resolve the crisis around Ukraine. In reality, however, the European Union is sabotaging them.
Experts have already cast doubt on any positive outcome of the much-awaited Trump-Putin meet in Alaska.
We've seen that already, that as Putin has been inflexible and not willing to negotiate in good faith. Trump has got angry. He made the deal with the Europeans about weapons. He has threatened these secondary sanctions, and I could see that happening again.
But Russia is not alone in this. Putin's old friend, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, spoke to him on call. According to North Korea's state-run television KRT, Putin expressed appreciation for North Korea's help in liberating the Kursk region. In Alaska, Orthodox churches have begun prayer for peace in Ukraine ahead of the big summit.
Our hope is that God will somehow touch the hearts of those involved, that there will be a valuing of life, a valuing of peace, a valuing of just the human life in general, and that will lead to a ceasefire and hopefully peace eventually, a lasting peace.
The diocese will hold additional prayer events before the summit on Friday, when the churches will remain open throughout the day for quiet prayer and ring bells at noon. Bureau Report, DD India.
All right, to get us more on this, our correspondent Akshay Dongre is joining us. Akshay, good morning. We've seen that the crucial Trump-Putin meeting will take place on Friday, but before that, a lot of groundwork is being laid, and we've also seen how Ukraine is pushing to be included in these talks, but at the same time, we see no response coming in with regard to this. Put all this together, Trump has also put forth a stern warning to Russia this time around. How severe or grave is the warning this time?
Well, perhaps let's start with the warning part because, many times it's being portrayed in the Western media, especially the European one, is also, taking it too far. The question that was asked about from Donald Trump was about the consequences if the talks fail. And he simply stated that there will be very severe consequences. That was his answer. Now, he did not specify that he wanted to say that the consequences will be severe for Russia or through sanctions or for the rest of the world, because the war will continue. So it's up to, it's a different perspective with which the Western media is usually picking it up. Because the kind of statement that has been given, it's just a word that very severe consequences to the question over what will happen if the talks fail. Now, how we already know that if the war continues, the consequences will be severe for both Russia and Ukraine, and that's that. As far as reading, between the line is concerned, we can only take the entire severe consequences through multiple perspectives. However, let's talk about the entire issue as far as starting from Trump's earlier statement that where he said that there will be some land swap agreement that has to be agreed, which was completely denied by Ukraine, stating that they will not be acting against the constitution of the country, to now, where Ukraine has been also been asked to be part of the second meeting that Trump expects will take place after the first. So it remains to be seen that how Ukraine and how much Ukraine will be involved, because the biggest decision that had to be taken was taken between Russia and US. And that perhaps gives Russia also the confidence to say that the meeting that took place between the European Union and Ukraine was irrelevant. And to some extent that remains true, because when the decision was being made over this Alaska meeting in Anchorage and the fate of the conflict, neither Ukrainian leadership nor the European Union was involved in the decision-making process of this Alaska meeting. It was decided between Russia and US. That remains one issue, and that was perhaps one of the festering issue in the European Union as well as the Ukrainian leadership, which has been resolved to some extent, because Trump has given some assurances stating that any kind of final decision will involve Kiev. However, if Russia agrees to sort of stop war on certain conditions, like the land swap of Donbass, which includes Luhansk and Donetsk regions, as well as Crimea. If that is agreed to and Trump gives a go-ahead, there is hardly anything that Ukraine can do on its own as far as stopping that decision, because if Russia and US agree to halting the conflict, and US wants to halt the conflict, can simply end the military support that it is giving to Ukraine.
All right, you're talking of how Ukraine could be cornered. given if US has its way in this in the talks. But then at the same time, Akshay, these talks come after more than 3 years of conflict between Russia and Ukraine. At the same time, Russia and Ukraine are still placed at the same positions when the war started, be it the NATO membership for Ukraine and the other conditions or the other important points that have been put forth by Russia. Having said that, we've also seen how the world has been criticizing Russia for its conflict with Ukraine. Put all this together, do you somewhere see softening of Russia when Putin meets Donald Trump?
Well, that clearly depends. I mean, what kind of negotiation the two leaders will have. However, we also have to address the concerns that Russia has. A military bloc that was clearly formed to contain Russia was far away from Russia. And when the pacts were being made, when Soviet Union disintegrated, there were agreements between European powers, the NATO, and the former Soviet Union country, the former Soviet Union, that the NATO will not expand further eastward, which will not threaten Russia's existence there. So that was not adhered to. NATO kept on expanding, and it's now right at the borders of Russia. Russia has legit concerns, and that these concerns have been repeatedly flagged to the Western nations. However, they kept on insisting on expanding and including more and more partners in the NATO membership, and we saw that the reaction to that was a full-blown war that initiated between Ukraine and Russia. So that's one concern. However, now Russia is also under pressure, clearly, with the Western world coming together, with the US sanctions, and with Russia getting pressurized to halt the war at domestic front as well somewhere. So as far as the situation is concerned, yes, it remains broadly where it was. There still remains the same conflict, there still remains the same issues, and it remains to be seen that how Donald Trump takes plans to solve these not just decades old, but perhaps centuries old issues as far as India West is concerned.
All right, Akshay, we'll leave it here. Thank you so much for joining in with those updates. So that was our correspondent, Akshay.